After Poland's rapid rise as a new military power in Europe, one thing is clear. The question of who can truly lead the continent is still far from settled. But while the eastern part of Europe continues to strengthen, the situation in the south is different. Here, the mix of politics, economy, and history is more complicated. And here, one of the most well-known countries in the world comes into play. In part 2, we'll see whether Italy has the potential to become the next possible leader of Europe, or if it's just another impressive name on paper, but weak when it comes to actual power. Chedi Sastro from Poland, we move to Italy. And even though we have to admit that Italy's historical reputation as the least of the great powers is not a good start, there are still some things in its favor. Just like with Britain, and like France, Italy is one of the largest economies in Europe. And its military is of moderate size, experienced and relatively advanced in technology. The Italian Navy, although no longer as strong as it once was, is still a significant force in the Mediterranean Sea. Its defense industrial base is also one of the more developed in Europe, from its capability to build warships to being an important partner in the F-35 program, as well as having several major defense corporations that produce Italian-designed equipment. In terms of non-combat logistics, Italy is better compared to many European militaries, and even though it is somewhat behind in modernization, it continues to strive to catch up with the aggressive timeline. But despite this, Italy also has some of the same problems as Germany. Its history is not as heavy, but the effects are still there. In addition, there's its current government. This, with a mix of right-wing nationalist ideology, causes doubts among some European partners. In politics, Italy is known for frequent changes in government and high-level scandals. It is also one of the countries that has long been accused of lacking in defense spending. Demographically, its population is aging. The military has long had problems with recruitment. And when it comes to willingness to fight, it is among the lowest in Europe, only 16% of the fighting-age population. According to the 2025 survey, compared to almost 40% who say they are conscientious objectors. And more than a quarter would rather use mercenaries than fight themselves. From a strategic perspective, critics argue that Italy is not really the right country to lead Europe in the future. Its focus is on Mediterranean threats and maritime security, while Europe is now more concerned with the possibility of a large-scale land invasion. And then we come to Spain, a country we need to discuss when talking about Poland or Italy, but also one that can quickly be taken off the list. No matter how much experts in European defense argue about what qualities a continental leader should have, there is one thing they all agree on. If a country doesn't want to invest in defense, it's clearly not the right choice. And in the case of Spain, this is clear. This was shown during the 2025 NATO discussions, where Spain almost refused the higher defense spending targets until it secured an exemption from the alliance, meaning it didn't have to spend as much as the others. Spain still aims to reach the former NATO requirement of 2% of GDP by 2029, but it did not try to meet the newer 5% target of the alliance, even with warnings from US President Donald Trump that it could be removed from NATO. We can say a lot more about Spain, from its political fragmentation, lack of power projection capability, distant location from Russia, shortage of personnel, low military salaries, weak modernization efforts, to internal mismanagement. But at this point, it's enough to see why it's also not a serious candidate to lead, at least in the defense of Europe. But we don't need to argue about that anymore, because it's clear that Spain really doesn't want that job. The IKEA Brigade from Spain, we move to the high north, where the Nordic nations of Europe together provide serious military potential. On the eastern flank of Europe, Finland has one of the largest and most capable fighting forces on the continent, and is also one of the few countries with a clear plan, making defense against Russia a whole-of-society effort. Finnish artillery and Arctic warfare skills are recognized worldwide, and its population is among the most willing to fight in all of Europe. Neighboring Sweden has a strong domestic defense industry centered on Saab and excels in Arctic and naval environments. The same is true of Norway, a high-tech military that excels in special operations warfare. Meanwhile, Denmark has a significant capability to project military power to protect Greenland, and is one of the NATO countries focused on rapid response and surveillance, a field that is weakening in many parts of Europe. But the main problem with the argument that the Nordics should lead the defense of Europe is simple. They are not a single country, and even if their capabilities are combined, they will still remain relatively small compared to other power centers. And if you look at them individually, most of them still are not strong enough to lead the continent. The clear exception here is Finland, a country with a unique approach to defense, technical capability, and social unity that other countries in Europe could learn from. In addition, it shares a long border with Russia. But even so, if Finland were to take the lead in defense, it would need to allocate a huge portion of its resources just to protect itself. This means there would be almost nothing left to help others. The situation becomes even more complicated because each Nordic country has its own issues with gaining the trust of other European countries. Sweden and Finland have just joined NATO. Norway is not a member of the European Union. And Denmark has become the center of one of the biggest tensions between the US and Europe because of the issue of Greenland. Each one also has its own issues. Denmark is accused of lacking investment in Greenland and has had some embarrassing scandals in its military leadership. Norway is struggling to adapt to Russian hybrid warfare and is facing a serious mental health crisis within its armed forces. Sweden, on the other hand, lacks specialized personnel and is struggling to balance domestic security and defense exports. Meanwhile, even Finland, which is the most advanced among them, knows that even if it gives everything, it is still extremely difficult to guard its entire front line against Russia, especially if it is alone. Windmilling at nothing. At this point, we shouldn't overlook the Netherlands, a country with a relatively small military of about 35,000 troops, but is able to punch above its weight in some aspects. It has a relatively large economy, even bigger than Poland or even the Nordic nations, and is currently working to double the size of its military by 2030. The Netherlands has developed a reliable air force and navy, and their special operators are among the best in the world. Their intelligence services also have a reputation as important contributors to European defense, but despite this, they still face many serious problems. It's not just a matter of political instability, a small and sometimes inexperienced military, or the significant budget cuts in recent decades. There are deeper issues, especially in recruitment. The country is not reaching its target to expand the military, and it's especially lacking in highly specialized personnel who take a long time to train and replace. There are also problems with modernization, the results are mixed, and the ground forces in particular are lagging behind. And what's even more serious is that the Dutch military still carries the legacy of a controversial historical incident, the 1995 Srebrenica massacre, where the Dutch UN peacekeepers failed to prevent the tragedy. This incident caused a huge crisis in the country, leading to the resignation of the entire government in 2002. If only the Netherlands had a bigger, more experienced, and more successful military after that, Europe might have more confidence in it as a possible leader. But at present, that's not the situation. Dishonorable mentions as we end this episode. Let's briefly go back to some countries that are clearly not fit to lead Europe in a possible future conflict. Belgium, home of the NATO and European Union headquarters, might seem like an obvious candidate on paper. But even though important European defense institutions are based here, that doesn't mean it's an important military player. In practice, Belgium is more of a host than an active force. It is often considered a military free rider, sometimes spending only about 1.2% of its GDP on defense, and relying heavily on neighboring countries for protection against any serious threats. Even its own military officers describe their forces as not deployable, and compared to other European partners, the modernization of their military has also been limited. Next is Turkey, a NATO ally and one of the strongest militaries in the entire alliance, but in the eyes of Europe, it is a complicated case. Turkey is known as the geopolitical black sheep within NATO. It is active in military operations in the Middle East and has domestic campaigns that are not supported by its European allies. It also has a history of promoting its interests and has used or threatened to use its veto power several times in important decisions. In 2020, it also actively opposed the accession of Sweden and Finland to NATO because of the issue with Kurdish groups. Despite Turkey's current military rearmament, it is clear that it prioritizes geostrategic autonomy. It does not intend to fully tie itself to regional alliances other than the NATO nuclear umbrella. It also uses its position as a key power in the Black Sea to strengthen its geopolitical leverage, a power that can be used not only against Russia but also against fellow NATO members. In other parts of Europe, it's also easy to rule out the others. The Baltic states have small militaries and are very vulnerable to Russia. Romania, Bulgaria, and some countries in Central Europe lack equipment, funding, or capability. All of those at the same time. The Balkans, as the joke always goes, remain unpredictable. Switzerland is neutral as always. Greece has just come out of a severe financial crisis and is more focused on the Eastern Mediterranean. And as for Portugal, it's better not to talk too much about the state of their military. And finally, Ukraine, a country with one of the strongest moral and strategic cases in all of Europe. More than anyone else, Ukraine knows what it means to face Russia. It has a large wartime military and is committed to a long struggle on Europe's eastern front in the coming decades. It continues to warn Europe to prepare for bigger conflicts in the future and repeatedly says that the continent will need Ukraine in the battles to come. It has also developed a defense industrial base that is more suited to modern warfare than what most of Europe has today. But for now, it still remains outside the European club. And even if it becomes possible to accept it in the future, it will still need many years of reconstruction before it can once again focus on a broader role in the continent. So who can lead Europe in war? At the end of a very long list, the answer is somewhat disappointing. Many can do it. France, Germany, Poland, and others. But all of them have significant obstacles. And most are too busy with their own problems to seriously take on the responsibility. We're in the middle of the 2020s, and Europe is gradually rearming as it absorbs the lessons of this decade. But when it comes to having a single clear leader of the continent, it's still lacking. And even though there's no perfect answer as to who should lead, the real danger is simpler. Perhaps nobody wants to be responsible for it. Thank you for watching.